The show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order. The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests.
And if you'll buy that, I got a bridge for you.
He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial.
How can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time that I've gone near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear.
Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show?
My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something.
We both took the same vote, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that.
Well, it doesn't show how exotic blinded by the light.
He is the free American, Clay Douglas. Catch the Free American weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern.
Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger will inside me till I'm almost overdone. I want to tear the moon out of the sky and drop the sun. Why do you never
For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8631.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. A little over 20 years running now. John Kountouris is my guest today. Hello, John. How are you?
Good morning, Clay. Good morning to all your listeners. I'm doing great. Thank you very much. How are you?
Oh, I'm really, really good, but that could be a rumor I started. Are you from Greece originally?
No, born and raised in Denver, Colorado. Basically, I lived here all my life, but I've taken many trips back and forth from here to Greece, and it's just a process that I've gone through for about 15 years in my life, where I've had to rediscover my roots as a Greek American. To basically learn in depth the Greek language, the Greek culture, to go and live in Greece for a while, to understand the Greek element there. So this has been a big process, a big journey for me. And I'll explain to your audience why.
All right. And my congratulations, I think, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to be rewriting some novels that I started 45 years ago to change the focus from New Orleans to Denver, because I believe that Denver, Colorado, is our future. I'll explain why later on. That's because they've taken a step to stop the police state in America.
That's right. Yes, they have.
I think
And there's a lot
I
of
think
good
a little
patriots there.
over what is a little over 80 years ago, they the elitist, whoever they are, stole our billion-dollar crop, stole our number one cash crop in America. They stole it from us. It was called hemp.
Yes, sir. That's right.
So you're living in Denver now?
No, I've been out here in Los Angeles for many years now, nearly 30 years. We came out here in 1985. I'm 38 years old now. So, but basically, the whole thing with Greece is not so much having Greek roots as it is understanding Western civilization itself, and also understanding the roots of this nation, of America. And most people out there have this incredible misconception that America basically was just founded on these guys from Europe, and there were some elitists and internationalists and enlightenists that were involved in this, and you know, they wanted a more democratic and free world and this and that and all that, and you know, that's pretty much it. There's a lot of Americans though out there too that believe that basically America owes so much, a big huge debt of gratitude to basically all the Jewish intellectuals that basically supposedly developed this nation, particularly within the past 100 years, with all the major developments that we have had, and think that it's the Jews that have contributed everything, of course, to what America is today, and this and that, and blah, 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 and everything else. There's also a huge conservative voter base of Christians out there who think that not only is that true, but they also think, though, that their very belief system itself with regards to Christianity is wholly and solely based on Judaism. So for the past 15 years, basically, I've been studying, researching, and rediscovering and basically reinterpreting with my own research and revising all of this. And basically, I've had to start from the ground up, because a lot of what we understand today about America and, you know, its roots and its foundings has nothing to do with what they tell us in the schools or in the media, et cetera, et cetera. And that really is the issue here. And in my first book that I wrote in 2014, it's called Your Academic Guide to the Greek Language, Culture, and Civilization by Kountouris. This book is very critical and very key because it contains a lot of stuff about the Greek culture, the Greek language, and history from ancient Greece all up to today. And what I do is I start off with the language, because the language is everything. Communication is everything. The ancient Greek language was basically crafted in a way to bring about a spiritual and intellectual revolution amongst the Greek people, and this occurred thousands and thousands of years ago. And the letters were designed in such a way where it would stimulate intellectual activity. And when the first major forum came about, it literally, according to Greek scholars, led to the great Renaissance and revival that happened amongst the Athenians, and after that all of Greece. And then they started to create amazing and wonderful, you know, things for their society at that time, and it led to the Golden Age. And that's when Greece became great, not only in Athens, but basically, you know, all over the world. So basically, I talk about how what the Greeks accomplished in the past, how it formed many, many different civilizations. I mean, for example, every European language out there is a subset, literally, of the Greek language, whether it be French, whether it be Italian, etc., because a lot of them first came through Latin, which of course comes from Greek. And not only that, recent discoveries are now proving and showing that the original the Romans, which were the Etruscans, were nothing more than a sub-Greek tribe. So, the Greeks accomplished a lot of stuff. So, starting off basically with the language, I demonstrate and I show just how important it was to forming civilization. Now, what I deal with the language part is how I'm able to teach it more effectively to seminary students in all the major seminary schools across America. Now, our Christian students are the future, basically, of America, and the reason why I say that is because the churches today, particularly the Protestant churches, they are a huge, huge voter base of support for politicians who support the whole thing about Israel, supporting Israel. And these Christians, of course, are influenced by the theology that they believe. That's why they vote for these politicians who support Israel. Now, my whole goal with this book is to basically get seminary students to take their thinking away from this whole the Jews are God's people thing to the fact that the Greeks, first of all, offered everything to our civilization, but number two, it was the Greeks, though, that took over Christianity after the apostolic era, and they, through the Byzantine Empire, ruled the world for over 1,100 years. And this is entrenched not only in the theology of the Greek Orthodox Church, but this is something that all the nations understood and believed. This is something, that the greatest scholars have written about. This is something that Ezra Pound wrote about, that Eustace Mullins wrote about.
Eustace Mullins was a good friend of mine. I was trying to bring him out to my home there in New Mexico when he died. I was in the process of that. He's appeared on my show many times.
Yeah, I believe I've heard a couple broadcasts where you had him on. He was an amazing guy. He plays a big role in my life and my work, which I can describe later, but he wrote the most amazing, revealing things about Greece, about basically the reason why not only Greece, but all of Western world is in the crisis situation it is today. And he was specific, too, with regards to Greece. In his book, The World Order, he wrote specifically the reason why the Byzantine Empire, fell, which is what I'm talking about now. My whole goal is to get Christians here to understand that truly, if you want to talk in an ethnic sense, the Greeks really are God's chosen people in a sense, because not only has every other nation out there been influenced by them, not only are the roots of this nation, basically are derived from Hellenism, but, the Greeks, they left a huge, amazing legacy, and this is something for the whole world, and this is something that is not taught today in your Christian seminaries. It's not taught, basically, in the schools today. I mean, go to any public school and teach the kids about the Byzantine Empire, or go to any major college.
I call it I call what we have here the public fool system. So
yes,
I'm not a big fan. I certainly didn't learn to read in the public fool system. I could read 1,000 words a minute when I went into the first grade. So not a big fan of our public fool system. The and let me tell you, I'll be doing later this week. I'll be doing more interviews with an archaeologist who talks about the worldwide civilization that the Greeks talked about. They told us about Atlantis. They told us about these this worldwide civilization. I mean, I find it absolutely amazing that there's pyramids all over the world, and we can't build one today. How did they get there? There had to be some type of communication, transportation to be able to achieve that, and they knew about it in Greece, didn't they?
Yes, they did, and what you're touching on is a very important subject, which of course ties into all of this. You know, the Greeks developed so many amazing technologies, it's ridiculous, including, of course, the whole sewage and toilet system, which is the most one of the most important inventions they ever did. But I talk about that too in my second book, Hellenic Crisis by John Kountouris, which is the definitive work on the Greek crisis, which is going on now. I've labored over this for 5 years, and this is something that is going to really wake up everyone to what's really going on, because the information comes from the best the best sources on the subject, including, of course, directly from the Greek government itself, from the statistical department of the Greek government, which handles all the official numbers, you know, basically of the Greek debt. I get that information firsthand from the actual lady that works there. So, but really the Greek crisis, as I lay out in this book, Hellenic Crisis, has to do with basically the fact that not only Greece, but the whole world has been in a crisis for many, many, many years. I would say from the fall of the Byzantine Empire up until today. And I'll explain. Basically, the Byzantine Empire lasted for over 1,100 years. It basically Christianized the world, and not in a way where most Christians would think. In other words, saying that, for example, to a regular Protestant, he wouldn't understand, because he'd think that, oh, that has to do with the Catholic Church. You know, most Protestants don't even understand what Greek Orthodoxy is, let alone the Byzantine Empire. And they would then group all this with Rome, which is evil, which is where the beast comes out of, and this and that. And, you know, these people have their minds muddled, because none of that is true. But basically, the Byzantine Empire left its mark upon the world, and the world was sustained, and the world was basically developed and Christianized and enlightened too through the Hellenic culture because of the Byzantine Empire, and the forces that be were kept in check. Now, in 1453, basically, right around that time, it was actually 1450, you know, basically the Ottoman Turks, along with the Venetian black nobility from Venice, came pounding on the doors of Constantinople because they tried to take over the empire. And the Greek Byzantines then, at that time, went to the west to seek basically help from their supposed Catholic brethren, who, of course, with whom they had already been split for about 400 years. And they said, hey, you know what? We're both Christian, two sides of the same Christian empire, basically, because, you know, the Byzantine Empire was the Christian empire in the east, and of course the Roman Empire, the Roman Christian Empire, was the empire in the west, basically. And so they asked the Catholics for help, the Catholic Church for help, basically to fight off the onslaught of the Ottomans. And of course the Catholics at that time told them, you know, basically, if you want help from us, renounce Christian Orthodoxy and espouse complete Catholicism. So we basically told them to pound sand, and we went on this issue on our own. So in 1453, eventually the Turks, they bust through the gates of the great city of Constantinople, and they took us over, and Greeks were enslaved for 400 years. But, however, I'd like to point out, though, most people, not only do they not understand, they don't know what the Byzantine Empire is, and that's why I talk about this in both of my books that I mentioned, but they don't even understand, those that do understand or have read about the Byzantine Empire, they don't even understand the causes of the fall of the Byzantine Empire. And the causes are not only because the Ottoman Turks, but because they had a huge major support from the black nobility of Venice. Now, who were these Venetians? They were nothing more than the powerful then Khazarian Jews, who basically were very powerful in banking and in trade. And they developed their own elite class, their own elite school on Aristotelian logic in Venice. They created counter-espionage. They're very powerful in world politics and very influential, and a lot of people feared them. They knew how to pit nations off against each other. And everything that you see today with the politics of America, of Great Britain, and other big major nations, all that came from them. Henry Kissinger, who's played a major role in the destruction of Greece in the past 40 years, who's, of course, Jewish himself, he in his Harvard thesis wrote about how he has basically been influenced by the story of the Venetians, by Venetian politics, and how basically, you know, he and the Rothschilds take their playbook for politics straight from the Venetians. So it was the Venetians who, with their support, aided the Turks to collapse the Byzantine Empire. But there were also very powerful Jewish circles, Jewish communities inside and outside of the great city of Constantinople that were within the general Byzantine Empire who secretly gave aid to the Turks in order for them to destroy the Greeks. I'll give you one example. Top Greek scholars have written about how the reason why the gates were opened, the reason why the Turks were able to bust through the gates of Constantinople in 1453 is because there was a very prominent Jewish community that lived within the empire at that time that supposedly was friendly toward the Greeks, but they actually literally opened up the gates and they allowed the Turks to come in to invade the city. And of course, once the city was invaded, the great city of Constantinople, from there it was a domino effect, and the rest of the Byzantine Empire collapsed with all its satellite states and basically all of that. Now, what happened after that was for 400 years we were enslaved, but it wasn't just really the Turks who did atrocities to us, but it was the very powerful Jewish communities there. For example, the first thing that the Turks allowed the Jews to do were to enslave thousands of young Greek children into the then world slave market, which was dominated by the Venetians. And this had all started back in the 1300s, whereupon some crazy, stupid deals were made between some Byzantine emperors at that time with some elite from Venice. And at this time, some Greek islands were basically sold off to Venice. And on those islands were enslaved Greek populations. And most people, don't know or haven't read about that. But this is a major historical fact. And at that point, the world slave trade was actually started by the Venetians. And after it gained success in the 1400s, they took it, guess where? Guess where else? To Africa. And it started from there with the black Africans. So, the Greeks have been dealing with attacks from these forces for many, many years. But in my book, Hellenic Crisis, I talk about how, when the Byzantine Empire fell, the Venetian black nobility from Venice, they basically began to become the new power in the world. And they began to take over the legacy that the Byzantine Christians had left the world, and they began to secularize it. They took the elements, the good Christian elements of the founding, beginning stages of the European Enlightenment, and they began to secularize them, and out of that you came the first forms of basically Marxism, of communism. And it's a very long story, but
some people, according to Rabbi Weiss, some people call it communism. I call it Judaism for the masses.
Yes, that's right. And the problem with Greece today, as well as many other European nations, is they're forgetting all of this major history. And it's first of all, it's not even taught in the public schools. That's the problem. And it's a major cover-up. For example, in America, from the turn of the century, even up till today, the American government has clearly spoken about the threat of Jewish Bolshevism. The State Department for many years, from the 19-teens on to the 30s, did major reports on this issue. And this is a major issue, and there are good elements within the American government that are trying to expose this, because that's, where we're headed. But overall, in the case of America, we've already been screwed because we've allowed the United Nations to set up camp in New York, and that is the seat of world government, and the United Nations, through all these globalist groups, is influencing policy, the American government policy. It's influencing what our kids are taught in school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really, what the issue is. And Eustace Mullins, he writes about this in The World Order, his book, The World Order. And he basically says how when the Byzantine Empire fell, there fell also Western civilization into the hands of these powerful elites.
I have tried to tell people, John, I've tried to tell people, your Messiah, Jesus, your Christ, tried to warn you, beware the Jews who say they're Jews but are not, or of the synagogue of Satan. Why can't they understand that when you've got these Khazarians from dominating everything that we do here? I mean, they have really enslaved us again, and we're not aware of it. I've also told people that if you want to call yourself a Judeo-Christian, you might as well say, I'm a satanic Christian, thank you.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's a whole major issue which I heavily deal with in my first book I mentioned, Your Academic Guide to the Greek Language, Culture, and Civilization. And that book, I submitted it to a top publishing house of Fuller University here in Pasadena. Fuller is one of the biggest Christian universities in the world. It's huge, it's influential. So I basically submitted my script of this book that I mentioned earlier is meant to teach seminary students that it's not the Jews that are God's chosen people, it's the Greeks. And the Greeks have this calling in order to enlighten the world. But when the Greeks turned away from this calling, they were then allowed to be overthrown by their enemies, because we made a lot of mistakes in the Byzantine Empire. We also turned away from our calling. We also began to build a rapport with the Catholic Church in the latter stage of the Byzantine Empire, and many theologians, Greek and non-Greek, talk about how this is one of the reasons why God took his protection away from us and we basically fell to our enemies. And, you know, basically I could say that same thing for America too. The reason why America is in this situation is because we've given in to our enemies. We didn't take care of them from the beginning when we should have. And if you look at the founding stages of this country, the Christians were very wide awake. The Christians did not believe in this myth where basically the Jews are God's chosen people. Let's let them run basically our whole society. Let's let them control education, banking, this, that, and everything else. No way. They were very awake. Your Sunday sermons were composed of a mixture of the gospel and, of course, the then threat of the Illuminati. That was, of course, then, you know, taking over America. But, you know, America, the great founding, you know, good founding fathers and the great patriots of this country, they did what they did up until the turn of the century, whereupon, of course, the Federal Reserve Bank was illegally installed in America. And then, of course, we know what the rest of the story is, you know, basically from there. But Mullins clearly points out the fall of Western civilization happened with the Byzantine Empire. And so, you know, basically the Greeks are enslaved for 400 years. Then what happens, we arrive now to 1821 when the Greek Epanastasis occurs, meaning the revolution, and we are supposedly delivered from the Turks. And basically what happened really was this, and this is the whole story about Greece. Greece was never able to rebound and become a great nation again for the simple reason is that during that time they resorted, unfortunately, some of their top leaders, not all of them, they resorted to Freemasonry in order to basically deliver themselves from the Ottoman Empire. And they were part of Freemasonic lodges, a lot of the Greek leaders in France and in England and these type of countries, and they sought help from them, and they thought, well, you know, with liberty, brotherhood, and equality, basically we're going to be able to overthrow the Turks' yoke off of our neck. But the sad issue is that once they were delivered from the Turks, there were some very good elements in the then Greek government that took over the government in its founding stages of the new state of Greece. And one of them was a guy by the name of Ioannis Kapodistrias. He was from an elite Greek family, and he lived in Russia. And he had a lot of good rapport with the Orthodox, you know, Russian czars at that time. So he came to Greece, and he took over in the 1820s. And the first thing he did was outlaw in all of Greece Freemasonry. He made an edict, and he said, from here on out, basically, you know, this is outlawed because everyone in the world knows that we turned to Freemasonry to deliver ourselves from the Turks, and what a stupid mistake that was, because we basically allowed the enemy to come into our camp. A different type of enemy this time, separate, of course, from the Ottoman Turks. And what he did was he created the first credit bank of Greece, which is a bank wholly and solely devoted to building up the economy of Greece. It had nothing to do with the international money lenders. It was free and independent. Of course, the Rothschilds, they heard about that. They got kind of upset, to put it lightly, and they had the guy overthrown. And what they did was they chose a guy by the name of Otto from Bavaria, Germany, which also happened to be the seat of the Illuminati, and they bring him to Greece, and they installed him as king, as I believe it was 1831. And from there on out, these forces have been ruling Greece. Also in 1841, the Rothschilds created the National Bank of Greece. And in my book, Hellenic Crisis, I talk about how the whole crisis with Greece is just this. You know, basically, they went from one lord, one master, right when they were delivered from the Turks, immediately to another one, the international money lenders. And once they began to take loans to rebuild their nation, with the installation, of course, of the First National Bank of Greece in Greece, they are immediately under the threat of the international money lenders. For example, what do I mean? There were times when Greece couldn't pay their loans, England would send their ships to the Greek port of Piraeus, the famous port of Piraeus, which goes back to ancient times, and they would close off the ports, and they wouldn't allow any export, any trading to be involved. They wouldn't allow the Greeks to do any trading, so they would hurt their economy that way. And there was a time too when the Greeks basically told the English to shove it, but the English basically sent their ships there to the port, and they threatened the Greeks with actual war. The international money lenders, though, they were the ones that had ordered this, because as we know, the Rothschilds at this time exerted heavy influence on the King of England, on the whole aristocracy at the time. As a matter of fact, they were the actual rulers of England at that time, and they still are, through the financial money system in cooperation with, of course, the Queen of England and other very powerful, very elite Jewish families from the Crown of England, as we all know. But
also, we've got dual citizens.
Loans.
We've got a dual citizenship. We've talked about this over the last week, and the fact that these attorneys, the Bar Association, they probably have their offices right across from the Rothschilds, and they're part of the corruption here in this country. What is happening? What is happening in Greece right now? We're getting we're getting fed clips. Greece is in all this problem, all these problems. I think that the international monetary money lenders, which have been around since Jesus' day, I think they are a little worried that Greece might follow the route of Iceland. What about that?
Well, Greece, the issue with Greece today is what I was talking about earlier, and that is they've been taking money from international money lenders since the 1800s, and all the debts and all the financial problems they have today dates back to then. They've had debts, revolving debts, that date back, they still do, back then. These debts, of course, overall do not belong to the Greek people, just as this silly, what is it now, $17 trillion national debt of the United States of America does not belong to the American people. This is all used by which to enslave a nation. But with Greece, really what happened was this. They wanted to be part of the Eurozone. And if you want to take it even more deeper, they wanted to be part of the European Common Market, which of course became the European Union. And that's really what the problem is with Greece today. They're part of the European Union, in a nutshell. I wrote an article. I write for a top Greek newspaper in Greece, one of the biggest newspapers. It's called It's called eleftheri ora, which means the free hour. It's circulated all over Greece, and it's also read on the media too. It's followed closely by the media. And I wrote an article called "The Big Euro IMF Scam," the Big Euro IMF Scam, and you can find that too on my blog, 300sploggers.com, 300sploggers.com. With that title, The Big Euro IMF Scam. And really, that's going to enlighten everyone about what's going on in Greece. And what I talked about in an article I just recently wrote for this big Greek newspaper is that basically Greece, when it decided to become part of the European Union and of course the Eurozone, that's really when all their problems started happening. And in 1999, the then Greek Prime Minister Kostas Simitis, he basically had Goldman Sachs manipulate the financial books of the state of Greece so that Greece would look lend-worthy, so that Greece would look trustworthy for lending by, of course, so that Greece would look actually trustworthy so as to be allowed to enter into the Eurozone in order to adopt the euro. That's what the issue is. So Goldman Sachs, what they did was, in order to mask parts of Greek debts, they did this accounting trick which involved currency swaps. They took basically some drachmas and they swapped them for like some Japanese yen and some dollars and things of that sort. And they made it look like Greece had more assets than it did. And in the same time, too, they all actually hid huge portions of Greek military spending. So Greece is then allowed by Brussels to get into the Eurozone. But actually, at that time, the statistical office in Brussels, Eurostat, was going through an internal crisis themselves, and they really didn't look into this issue about, Greece being aided by Goldman Sachs. And basically, Greece gets in. They immediately... it was a process. They get approval, and finally, January 2002, they get the euro. So what happens? Immediately, inflation sets in. You go to the store, you buy a regular quart of milk. Usually it's, let's say in terms of dollars, 50 cents. Now all of a sudden it's $2. So inflation sets in across the board. But it wasn't just that, though. What you had, too, were successive Greek governments who took major lending from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, in order to basically buy major military expenditures, in order to pay for things in Greece, in order to pay for the Olympics, which occurred in 2004. And I just read a statistic how their budget for the Olympics was $6 billion. Well, they actually ended up spending $60 billion on basically designing the Olympics. And now, of course, all those infrastructures have rotted away. If you go see these amazing Olympic pools they've made, it's a disaster. I mean, they literally now look like ancient Greek ruins because no one has taken care of them in the past 10 plus years. So, the Greek governments were taking a lot of lending. They're wasting this money. And basically, that was basically the issue. But leading up to now, though, to this present crisis, in 2009, though, Greece actually had dealt a lot with these debts and had somehow paid them off. And before they came under the control of the Troika from Europe, which is the European Central Bank, the IMF, and the European Commission, their financial situation was pretty much sustainable and okay. And not only that, they actually had a surplus for that year, which was like 2 billion euros for 2009. But what happened was George Papandreou, the then prime minister, in late 2009, he, along with his cronies, with Goldman Sachs, with George Soros, they crafted this whole plan, basically, by which to put Greece under the control of the Troika and basically, in effect, enrich themselves. So George Papandreou goes to Strauss-Kahn of the IMF, and this is all mainstream news media reporting, and he basically, tells them, we need funding to get out of the financial hole. So Strauss-Kahn looks at, we're talking about October 2009, Strauss-Kahn looks at all the numbers of Greece, and he's like, you guys don't need lending. You're actually okay. He goes, I don't recommend it. And he goes, you shouldn't be coming to me in private to talk about these things. This should be made a major issue with all the institutions of Europe. So George Papandreou basically, he kept pressuring Strauss-Kahn. And what happened was Strauss-Kahn, before he wanted to agree to anything, he told George Papandreou twice in 2010, before, of course, Greece signed the first agreement with the Troika. He told George Papandreou, the first time I believe was March of 2010, hey, you know what, according to the treaty of the IMF, Greece, they're allowed to reduce its debt by 50%, and, that'll make the Greek debt sustainable, and therefore, the Greeks should be able to handle this crisis they're going through just fine. Wow, George Papandreou, he basically told him no. Can you imagine that? He told the guy who controls the IMF, no, we don't want to go that route because, that's not where we're taking this issue. And Strauss-Kahn came to him again, even after Greece had signed the first agreement with the Troika. It was July of 2010. Strauss-Kahn came to him again in August and told him the same thing. Hey, we can reduce the Greek debt. George Papandreou, again, refused it, which makes, of course, everyone wonder, of course, why. But in effect, in my research with all of what Greece has gone through in the past 5 years and consulting the best journalists, of course, the Greek statistical office, it's called Elstat from Greece, the whole issue now, basically with this whole supposed $400 billion debt, which of course has basically forced the Greek people to undergo austerity measures, meaning cuts in salaries and pensions and all that stuff. This whole debt is a big fraud. And the way it's a big fraud, basically, is what led Greece into this, the way it became a fraud is what led Greece into the situation is today. For example, the lady that was one of the heads of the Greek statistical office, her name is Zoe Yorgandas. Well, in late 2009, when George Papandreou was in the prime minister and who was crafting this whole scam to screw the Greek people, she was approached by his administration and told specifically to blow up the Greek debt. In other words, to make it look a lot larger than what it actually was. And this entailed, of course, literally passing, old debts from the past onto the Greek books of that era, of that time, to make it seem like the Greek debt was out of control. And she was also told to fiddle with, of course, the deficit, which, according to statistical rules from Brussels, had to be around 6%, of the overall, national debt. To GDP. And basically, the deficit to GDP ratio is the biggest thing, of course, with Brussels. That's how they basically approve of a country entering into, of course, the Eurozone in order to adopt the Euro. But basically, she was told to manipulate both of these figures, both the Greek debt and the Greek deficit. And this is what led Greece into the situation it is today, because due to those manipulations, that is what gave the pretext to put Greece under the control of the Troika, and then, of course, for the Greek people to undergo these very austere, cutback measures with salaries and pensions and public benefits and all that type of stuff. And the Greek people have suffered tremendously because of this, and it's a great fraud and a great evil perpetrated on the Greek people. George Soros, Hank Paulson, major Greek politicians are all involved in this scam. And basically, really what it has to do with, this whole supposed Greek crisis, has nothing to do with any crisis. There was no crisis because, like I said, Greece's financial situation was just fine. It had everything to do with the fact that the Greek people, as Eustace Mullen said, gave the greatest empire on the face of the world. The Greek people basically have given everything to the Western world. And the powers that be, the New World Order, the Rothschilds, the black nobility of today, as Henry Kissinger, of course, has, in his own words, ascribes to. He is a Lombard politician type, and of course the Rothschilds are Lombard bankers. Of course, the Lombards were the bankers in Venice. These people today don't want Greece to become a powerful nation, because once they realize that Greece will change the world. Now, Greece, of course, had two opportunities in the past 100 years. There was the Micronesian War between Greece and Turkey from 1919 to 1923, where the Greeks were taking back at that time old Byzantine lands. They had actually taken back at one point Constantinople in 1920. But the then Greek Prime Minister, Eleftherios Venizelos, he was a Rothschild agent, and he basically caused the defeat of the Greek forces, and the Greeks lost everything and came back to Greece defeated. There was another time where from 1967 to 1974 we had a Greek military junta in Greece. The reason why the military junta came in is because at that time everyone in the Greek government, including of course the king of Greece at that time, Pavlos, they all understood there was a major threat of communism in Greece. And of course, Greece had already undergone major problems with communism, and we even had a major civil war between the royalists and the communists that lasted from the 30s to like the 50s, and there was a lot of bloodshed that went on.
Let me stop you there to fill in.
Yeah,
let me stop you to fill in a little blank spot. World War I, World War II. Let's say World War II specifically. Hitler stood up against the Jews. Hitler stood up against the banking systems, and of course Italy, Mussolini was with him. Where did Greece stand on that in that particular war?
Yeah, those are very critical. Those are very good questions that were also very critical, which I'm actually dealing with the Greeks right now. Here's the issue with that, and that all ties in with what I'm saying, as a matter of fact, too. Hitler basically had a very he was motivated to deal with this scourge of basically world Judaism, let's say, in general. Basically, if he would have started a campaign, in my opinion, with my research, more of a greater campaign to alert basically forces in Europe of his plans, it would have been more successful if he got more nations on board. And he already did have a lot of nations on board, but he kind of spread himself too thin, and that's why Germany lost. But at that time, though, there's this whole myth that at that time Greece withstood Germany. Okay, for example, in October, late October, it's October, I believe, 31st, 1940, we have this day in Greece, this national it's a national type of holiday called the No Day. In Greek we say ohi, ohi. And supposedly at that time, the Italians came to the Greeks, to the then Greek Prime Minister, Metaxas, Ioannis Metaxas. Because, you know, Hitler is starting his campaign, and we need you to get on board with this, okay? So what happened was at this time, the then Greek Prime Minister, who, by the way, was an actual fellow student with Hitler in the school they studied in France. I'm talking again about the then Greek Prime Minister, Metaxas. And of course he knew Hitler very well. He told them, he goes, no, ohi in Greek. And so apparently this started the whole issue between Italy and Greece. So Italy comes in, invades Greece, and Greece routs them, okay? And then what happens is the Germans are like, oh gosh, we got to come in and take care of the whole mess here. So the Third Reich comes into Greece and basically, you know, crushes the Greek powers, you know, immediately. And of course you had major scuffles all throughout Greece between Greek soldiers and German soldiers. In my father's village in Sparta, we're from ancient Sparta, basically we have monuments all over the place that talk about how, you know, for every German that was killed by Greeks, the Germans killed 10 Greeks. Towards the end of the war, though, Ioannis Metaxas has a change of heart, and he realized, oh my God, Hitler is actually dealing with the scourge of world Jewry. And he wants to free the nations of this scourge. And this is what his whole goal is, okay? So, basically he starts sending Greek troops to the Third Reich, to German troops, from historical records that I've read, in order to fight off the Russian communists. Because at this time, here's the problem, here's the paradox. Greece, which is on the side of, the West, the Allies, basically, they're fighting, in the beginning, the Germans, okay? But, at the same time, they're undergoing, though, a civil war. So they're fighting two fronts right now. And the royalists in Greece, they were fighting, basically, not only, of course, the Germans, but they were also, because they had a lot of rapport with English troops who were helping them fight the Germans, but they were also fighting the communists. But here's the paradox, though. Greece overall at this time as a nation, not just the royalists, but also many communist elements, they're fighting the Germans. But the Greeks, though, that were royalists, basically, who were fighting, the Germans and, of course, the communists, because there was a civil war, they did not realize the fact, though, that the reason why they had the threat of communism going on at the same time is because the Allies themselves allowed the communists to invade Greece. And that's the whole paradox. In other words, Greece is, fighting on the side of America and Great Britain and these type of nations, but in reality, it was America and Great Britain and other nations that were allowing the communists basically to invade Greece and other countries at this time while World War II is going on. And, Greeks are starting to realize that and, understand this great paradox. And they're like, oh my God, the very people that we were helping during World War II to fight the Germans are the very ones that released communism to our country and which has destroyed it. So this is a whole issue that I'm dealing with and slowly unraveling for the Greeks, is they don't know a lot about these issues. There are some top Greek scholars that do. So basically, in a nutshell, here's the point.
Go ahead.
Hitler, okay, in a nutshell, Hitler, basically, he tried to get Greece on board, and he's like, okay, he tried to slap him around. A lot of atrocities did happen in Greece on the side of the Germans, but the reason why it happened is because the Greeks did not understand what Hitler's goal was here. And unfortunately, these things did happen. There were atrocities. But if the Greeks would have understood, okay, things would have been a lot more different for Greece today, and of course for the whole world. I believe that if a lot of nations understood what Hitler's goal was, everything would have been a lot different. And we had major politicians, we had major celebrities helping Hitler. I mean, we had, of course, Henry Ford. So, that's basically the whole issue in a nutshell with regards to that issue. Now, we have a party, by the way, real quick, called Golden Dawn. Have you heard of them, Clay?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I support the party, and I'm editor for their website, for their official news website, for the English edition. I help them publish it in English, and I know a lot of the people that are involved. Some of my relatives know them very well. So basically, their whole goal right now is to try to get the Greeks to understand what I just talked about, between basically the Nazis' relations with the Greeks and all that type of stuff. And a lot of the Greeks, they don't understand. And they have this whole issue going on in Greece, how we need war reparations from the Germans and this and that, blah, 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 and everything else. Okay, that's fine. So let's say they owe us. But see, today the problem is not the German people with the Greeks, and like it was back then. It wasn't, well, let's talk about today, because back then it was different with Hitler. But today the problem with Germany is not the German people. It's the very powerful Jewish banking circles that control Merkel that are screwing Greece. They are the problem for Greece, not the German people. So,
well, let me ask you. There's a couple of questions. There's one that's been in the back of my mind, and I've told people, going over these stories every day, that it might be possible that after being under communism for 100 years, the Russian people under Putin have said, whoa, wait a minute, we can take this back. And one writer that I saw some of his work said that, that may have been Edgar Cayce, said that Russia was the hope of the world. And it's occurred to me that we might be getting put in a position. The whole Cold War, in my opinion, was a farce, was a false flag. Be afraid, be very, very afraid. The Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. Hollywood gave us that. Now, when I see Putin on some news clips, it seems to me he is favoring the Greek Orthodox Church. And is it possible that Putin is not a communist at all, but is a religious leader that is standing up against the oligarchs and backing the church? What are the chances?
Well, that's a huge issue in Greece. That's an issue that I've been dealing with a lot too, writing articles about it. Putin, of course, is a former KGB agent.
Yes.
Putin just, gosh, it was April of this year or May, I believe. I think it was May. It was May. He just had this big commemoration take place in Russia, where the Russians basically commemorated how the Stalin regime resisted the Nazis. So here you have, in May of this year, hundreds of world leaders attending this conference, including, of course, our present Greek government. They sent delegates there too, to commemorate how the communist Russians at that time basically dealt with Hitler. And you see, Clay, you see on TV Russian shoulders of today carrying that ugly, we use a lot of characterizations for this flag, that ugly red flag with the hammer and the sickle. And here I am saying to myself, is there something wrong with this picture? Gee, I thought this was now the Russia, the great Christian Orthodox Russia of Putin, which has nothing to do with communists, because we all know that, what the communists, of course, the Jewish Bolshevik communists did to Russia for 70 years. Okay, now if Putin is basically a great defender of Orthodox Russia, which is, of course, the enemy of the Jewish Bolsheviks, and the Jewish Bolsheviks, of course, in their own plans stated how they needed to eliminate the Tsar, his regime, and, of course, Orthodox Christianity. If that's the case with Putin, why in the heck are they having this national celebration, okay, of how the communists fought off the Nazis? Is there something wrong with this picture? You see the Russian soldiers carrying the red flag with the hammer and the sickle. And could it just be basically a national holiday that they were commemorating because, it had to do with a historical event and this and that, blah, blah, blah? Because, Putin in the past has clearly stated how, the Bolshevik regime was composed primarily of Jews that did these atrocities. Okay, Putin has said that in the past. But here's the issue, though, with the Putin of today. And I would say, more importantly, the Putin of the past several years. And there's a reason why I say that. In the past several years, at least, we've seen Putin take trips to Israel. Of course, the Jews are the ones who were the founders of communism. The first, of course, communes were the kibbutz in Israel at the turn of the century. We've seen him go there, wear the Jewish yarmulke, to go to the Wailing Wall, to do all this type of stuff. The Jews even named a street after him in Israel, okay? He has rapport with Henry Kissinger, with Benjamin Netanyahu, with all these criminal types. And basically, he allows major rabbis from Chabad Lubavitch to influence his government. His government is full of them, okay? Could it be that Putin is just playing their game? This is what a lot of people think. And, because he understands how powerful the Jews are and he can't take them all on at once. Could it be he's just playing their game? Well, besides all that, what people can do is basically look at the facts for themselves. Now, we do know that Putin, of course, is a Freemason. Okay, and there's pictures of him with George Bush and all these leaders from China and these other countries. wearing these Freemasonic garbs and meeting with each other basically in major summit meetings, and they're all in Freemasonic, attire. But could it be, though, that Putin is just playing this game because he's really this great patriot leader? In my opinion, unfortunately, no. And the reason why I say that is because it was Eustace Mullins who said every world leader is an actor, a little actor, on this world drama that is being unfolded before our very eyes on behalf of the New World Order. But that being said, 2 months ago, Putin's former wife came out into the news, and she gave an interview to one of the biggest German newspapers, The Bild. Did you hear about that, Clay?
No, I haven't heard about that.
Okay. Of course, a lot of people in America haven't heard about it. The reason being is because this is being hushed up by Western media. But this is something that just throws everyone for a loop here. Okay, she comes out and she basically says to the German Bild, and I have this recorded with Greek video media clips, and I've written an article about it in Greek, but I can also write an English article and I can post that on social media. But she says the following: the Putin, she says, that you see in government is not him, she says. It's his double. Putin has been dead for several years, she said. The reason being is because the real Putin, she says, was assassinated because he basically took on the powers that be. So they had to eventually get rid of him. And she says, I remember the night when they sent his double in, and he told me straight, if you or the kids say anything, you're dead. She said this to a top German newspaper. They ran with the story. This was all over European news. So, there's a big, huge branch of the conspiracy theorists out there in the 9/11 Truth Movement that talk about how there's so many different, doubles out there. There's so many people that basically are pretending to be someone on the media when in reality they're not. They're someone else. And of course, there's a lot of talk about Putin, and there's been done facial recognition analyses done on Putin's facial characteristics. I'm talking about the Putin of now, of today, that compare him with the Putin, let's say, of 5-10 years ago, and it's a completely different person, they say. Okay, great. Now, what does this tell us? How should we react? What should the Greek people do? Because they're seeking help from Russia. What should the whole world do? I think that the New World Order is taking place. I'm not, though, a pessimist. I'm not like, oh my God, everything's going to hell in a handbasket, because I believe we can turn the tide if we all unite as nations around the world. Not under this globalist nonsense, but under the common fight against the New World Order. And I believe we can do something about this. But, really what we need is an awakening. People need to pray. People need to get informed. And I think that, basically something can happen. I also believe in divine intervention. I believe that God will intervene in this whole situation with Greece and, of course, the whole world. But what was said in this interview by Putin's wife was astounding. And, of course, I didn't hear anything from the major media here, Fox, CNN, nothing. I just wanted to throw that one out there, Clay.
Well, I appreciate that. And, of course, we know that this whole Jewish constituency, these globalists, they do assassinate our leaders, from Lincoln to Kennedy, and how many more? How many more? We really have no idea. Most of these politicians, we don't even see them until after they're ensconced in Washington and been initiated. Whether it's by the Zionists or whether it's by the Masons, we don't know. The question I've had, now, they've tried to assassinate me. Back in 2004, when I, and I do admit that I may have made a tactical error by referring to 9/11 as an exaggerated case of Jewish lightning. Can you hear me? Are you all right?
Yes.
Okay. Then, and I put building numbers.
I've heard you talk about this before. I've heard you talk about this before on your radio program, and basically, it's not a surprise.
Now, again, the question I've got And what I'm really trying to deal with, I've even said that I may stop writing articles because what's really happening here, just like you've talked about here in the last few minutes, is almost beyond belief. My fiction that I write, I've got what I thought was science fiction that I wrote 45 years ago that's more believable than the truth that I write.
Right.
And
wow.
maybe it was me starting the militias in New Mexico, which quickly spread to the other states. You know, I was attacked by the ADL for that. Well, wait a minute. What part of the Second Amendment don't you understand? Were they afraid? They were just afraid that we might have an enforcement arm, a arm of the, call it a revolution. I don't consider it a revolution because we're really defending the Constitution I took an oath to defend.
That's right.
But
exactly.
how do we reach the people out there? To me, this is the most frustrating thing. You know, they're buying into this Jewish propaganda. Oh, he's an extremist. Oh, he's a racist. He's an anti-Semite. An anti-Semite is someone the Jews hate. I mean, not I don't hate anybody.
Right. Right. You know, if you just look at some polling and statistics about how people are waking up in America, and there are some, you know, trustworthy statistics and polls out there. You know, you'll see how the masses are waking up in America, in Europe, around the world. And basically people are starting to realize what's going on. In my own family, Clay, people are waking up, and it's exciting. The Greek people are waking up in the drills, particularly, of course, unfortunately, because of what they're going through. But I think, though, that things might have to arrive to this point in order for us to all wake up. You know, there are righteous elements in government, in the media, and in the religious sector that are trying to expose all this. And a quick example of that, of course, is how you have New Hampshire, Iowa, and a couple of other states, which I can't remember right now, that have actually put ballots, put on the ballot bills in their respective Congresses, Senates, that want to basically reinstitute the original 13th Amendment that was taken out of our Constitution by the Rothschild bankers and lawyers in 1871, whereupon the 41st and 42nd Act of Congress was taking place, which turned the American government into a corporation. And it's astounding because you have literally representatives from these states that are researching this issue, that are talking about it openly. They sound like, let's say, quote-unquote, major conspiracy theorists, but they're not. They have all the documentation. And they're saying that the original 13th Amendment was surreptitiously taken out of our Constitution by these forces from Europe in order to turn us into a corporation. And this, to me, gives us hope. I mean, I can remember this guy from Iowa, speaking of Iowa, what's his name, this black representative, I believe, or senator, Alan Keyes.
Alan Keyes, a great guy. I met him in the 1996 presidential elections, and if we'd had a fair election system, Pat Buchanan would have been president, Alan Keyes would have been vice president.
Oh, that's right, that's right. Wow, that's amazing. You know, I was shocked because I saw him on an old Fox News clip from like a few years ago, and he was with I don't know if it was Ron Paul or one of these guys, but I have the clip in my favorites here on YouTube. But anyway, he was talking with this guy, Judge Napolitano from Fox News.
Yes.
And he, out of the blue, and very few people caught this, said, everyone knows that, you know, basically our government is a corporation, he says. He said it just like that. And he says the CEO of the corporation is President Obama, right? And when I saw this clip, I was like, wow, this guy's trying to send out a message there, you know. And it looked like Judge Napolitano knew what he was saying too, and was agreeing with him. I mean, but it's true. This is the issue. I wrote a front page article for the same Greek newspaper I talked about earlier about a month ago. And basically the title was how the Greek government is a corporation, just like every other major Western governments make up our actual corporations. And I gave proof. For example, I was doing some research on the official website of the Security and Exchange Commission, and I was seeing how many governments around the world invest on the New York stock market. And when I looked at Greece, it said literally next to Greece that Greece was filed as a company. The nation of Greece, meaning the Hellenic Republic, is filed as a company that invests, you know, basically in the New York Stock Exchange. So this should not come as a surprise. And people should ask themselves, why in the heck are governments associated with business? Why are they called companies? Why is it that the actual United States, cut off the America now, the actual United States, according to Federal Code, Section 28, Paragraph 15, why is it registered as a federal corporation? Well, there's a reason why. And there's a lot of good materials out there. If people want a very good definitive documentary, there's a documentary called Corporation Nation by Clint Richardson. Corporation Nation by Clint Richardson. You can find it on YouTube. It talks all about this. It's very extensive. You know, but that's really what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the fact that government has been influenced by big business and banking for many, many years. Our government, Greece's government, Europeans, you know, nations' governments. And we know who are behind these.
Technically, you could call that fascism, couldn't you?
Well, corporate fascism.
Yep. It's
that's really what it is.
Well, I've talked about the original 13th Amendment when I started the Free American over 20 years ago, when I started the militias around the country. And, you know, I had, when I met Alan Keyes, I was working with a presidential candidate by the name of Charles Collins. And Charles was a wealthy businessman from Georgia, first one to sign up for the presidency in 1996. But most people never heard of Charles Collins because every time he got up on stage, and I traveled with him from Maine to California, through Dallas, through Phoenix, every time Charles got on stage to tell people we could buy back the Federal Reserve, that we needed to, and get rid of our national debt, they turned off. Every cameraman on stage turned their cameras off. And in 2 states, they simply unplugged his microphone. So nobody in America knew the name Charles Collins. And we would put up the poster boards saying Collins for president. When we, the night we got there, in the morning we'd go in, and there wouldn't be a Collins sign up. There'd be a Buchanan sign, there'd be a Keyes sign up, there'd be a Dole sign up, no Collins signs. So until we, I don't see how can we elect anybody honest when the Jews control the media?
Right, exactly. That whole issue goes back to the fact that unless people take hard action, unless people wake up and get informed and take hard action against Jewish control in America, people can forget it. Of course, they keep us under their Kabbalistic spells that have to do with how we need to sympathize for the Jews because of the supposed Holocaust that they went through, and that, oh my God, they were persecuted in Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years, so we owe them everything. And you know, I just published and I just sent an article to the same Greek people I talked about, and it talks about how the Jews today are predicting that their Messiah is coming back, Clay, get this, September the 12th, notice the date, 2015. Top rabbis in Israel saying he's on his way, and they're calling Jews from all over the world to make these aliyah, these ascent trips to Israel, because, you know, Jews are under threat and we need to go gather in Israel because the Messiah is coming to deliver us and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And they mentioned in a top Jewish publication recently, about a week ago, it's called Top Israel News, something like that, I can't remember, how September the 12th, gee, that's really close to September 11th. And in this article, I talked about how, you know, in the New York Times in 1940, there was a big article during World War II that said, the New World Order is pledged to the Jews. And you can find the respective clip on YouTube. The New World Order is pledged to Jews. And in it, all these world leaders are quoted as saying, out of this world war is going to come a brave new world, and basically the Jews are going to be delivered from all their oppression, and, you know, they're going to influence the whole world now for a better and more free society, and this and that and everything else. And I also mentioned in this article how the Congress, 13 days later, on August the 19th, 1940, in the 76th session of Congress, they said that basically the new order of things is going to take place somewhere around the middle of September of 2001. Now notice the date, the middle of September 2001. Well, gee, what happened right around that time? 9/11. And in this report, they talk about how it could happen right around the Jewish Feast of Trumpets, September the 17th, 2001. But then they also started getting kind of, started getting a little bit more distinct and accurate, let's say, in their dating, with regards, of course, in their dating and predicting, of course, of 9/11, because this is really where I'm taking this. When in the minutes of the same session of Congress, it is recorded by the Speaker of the House, how, you know, right around September, major events have taken place in the past 2,000 years. And they said, let's take, for example, how Jesus Christ himself was born on September the 11th, 3 BC, September the 11th, 3 BC. And of course, most scholars out there agree that right around that time, that's when Jesus was born, because he couldn't have been born and then, of course, transported around Israel in the winter, because the winters in Israel are extremely cold. It would have been impossible. So we have the official records of Congress saying Jesus was born on September the 11th, 3 BC, and then they're saying, hey, the New World Order is going to start somewhere around middle of September 2001, and now we have the Jews saying in this major Israeli publication, September 12th, 2015, our Messiah is coming back. Gee, I wonder what that could mean. So, you know, people need to be informed, they need to be alerted, they need to know about 9/11. Eustace Mullins wrote the very first article exposing the Israeli Mossad's involvement in 9/11 3 days after the event. We're talking about, let's say, September, I believe it was 14th or 15th. He wrote an article for the New York Times, I kid you not, and the person that published that for him was none other than Frank Rich, the big writer from New York Times, and I believe Rich is Jewish. Frank Rich published that article for Mullins, and Mullins talked about that in an interview he did for some radio program. I can't remember, it was about 10 years ago he did it. But that was published. You know, and there are people out there that are leaking the truth, and there's a lot of Jewish people out there, sincere people, I believe, in my opinion, that are in this struggle too. You know, we had, what's his name, 2 years ago on CSNBC, Carl Bernstein, the guy who, of course, exposed Nixon with Watergate, straight out say that we need to stop with this myth that Osama bin Laden was behind 9/11, because we all know it wasn't him, it was Bush and Cheney and the Jewish neocons. And of course, when he said that, you know, the guys on the show basically, you know, lost their cookies. They, you know, basically had the rug pulled underneath them, and they, you know, freaked out. And of course, Carl Bernstein, after that, he got a lot of flack for that. You know, there's some people out there. There's a few good, sincere Jews. I mean, I've been looking for them. Trust me. I want to believe that there's a lot of them out there that are sincere and that want to see change and that don't like what world Zionist Jewry is doing to the world. I want to believe that. But the issue is not just the Jews; it's the people that execute their plans, willingly or unwillingly. We're talking about the media. We're talking about Protestant Christianity. We're talking about all these different people out there, Hollywood, that go along with what they're doing and have no clue, what they're doing. And basically, I believe though that there is an awakening taking place with the 9/11 Truth Movement. There's an awakening taking place too with this whole new movement, how everyone's getting into quantum physics and understanding how the power of the universe works, and how they're having these awakenings, which is leading them to the truth about all this stuff that's going on and making them understand that, it is the powerful elite Jews through all their globalist organizations that have taken away our sovereignty as man. And when they learn basically through the teachings of quantum physics that every individual is sovereign and that your destiny cannot be manipulated by anyone unless you allow it through your own thinking and feeling,
Jesus,
then people can understand.
Jesus told us, John, if you can do what I do and more. I think that was his real message to us, that God is within us. It ain't in that rabbi, it ain't in that priest, it ain't in that preacher over there. That if our Creator, omniscient and omnipotent, I think he's just bored to tears, so he created us and gave us free will, so we could decide whether we wanted to be good or evil. Evil may pay better, the devil pays in gold. but we've really got a choice here. We can be good. We can provide for our families. We can grow our own food. We can do a lot. We don't have to work for these evil people. Now, I wrote books about this 45 years ago that I'm just starting to edit and get ready for publication now. I think it's time.
Wow.
And like I said, I'm going to probably reset it in Colorado, because part of the theme is that we need to abolish all laws against victimless crimes and end this whole prison industrial complex. I don't want to go to prison and work for IBM. I don't think that's a right thing, and I don't think anybody ought to go to jail for a victimless crime. And Colorado's proven that that's a profitable way to think about it. We can restore this country. There was hemp fields on the back of $20 bills back in 1914.
That's right.
We've really got choices here. We've got choices that we can make. And in my Solomon series, or my Solomon novels that I started 45 years ago, the country is divided, kind of like it is now. And some people think Solomon is the Messiah, and some people think he's the Antichrist. And the answer is that he's both, but he's working for us. He's working for good. The Jews think he's the Messiah. The Christians, the deluded Christians, think he's the Antichrist, because he kind of looks like the devil. But again, I've told people I'm writing science fiction from now on. It's that way I can do what I want, and I don't have to listen to you guys nitpick on me.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's definitely one good way to get the message out, is through science fiction. I totally agree.
Now, what about your books? Now, they have come after me. They've started rumors, done what they could to block my books. I'm blocked in libraries. I'm blocked in places. I still got Facebook. I still got Twitter. I still got things like that. But how about your books? You have publishers for them. Tell people let's tell people how they can get them too.
Yes, the first major book that I wrote was last year. It's called Your Academic Guide to the Greek Language, Culture, and Civilization by John Kountouris. The first way you can basically find it is on my website, johnkountouris.com, and that's spelled one word, Johnkountouris. N as in Nancy, Koun as in Nancy, TOURIS.com. You'll see 2 book images pop up on your screen. Basically, immediately once you get onto my website. You can find them on smashwords.com. That's one word, smash, and then words, smashwords.com. And of course, they're also available on amazon.com. All you got to do is just punch in that title. Now, the first book, of course, deals with the whole fallacy of Judeo-Christianity very effectively. And basically, I talk about how the ancient Greeks, they predicted, get this, and prophesied more accurately and more distinctly about the coming of Christ into the world than what the Hebrew prophets did. We're talking about 10,000 years before Christ, at least. We're talking about, for example, ancient Greek figures such as Hermes the Trismegistus, who's a major figure in world history in many different circles. He's recognized by science, of course, as the founder of alchemy and things of that sort. He's recognized by Christians. He's recognized by the occult movement, you name it. While he was Greek, he lived in Egypt, and he was literally the teacher of Isis and Osiris. He was a demigod. His writings are survived to this day. They're mentioned by church fathers. Basically, what he said, in effect, 10,000 years before Christ, before any Hebrew whatever guy came onto the scene, and that's another issue I deal with in my book, he said that there's one true God who created heaven and earth. He formed man out of the ground and breathed life into him. He combined him with earth and water and breathed life into him. He has a son. He has a spirit. I mean, the whole list goes on. And this is undeniable stuff. So, you know, our theology comes directly from the Greeks. Did not come from Abraham, didn't come from these guys. And I deal with this whole issue, too, about who the Jews are today, of course, and who they are from ancient times. And they're nothing more, basically, than an offshoot of Hellenic culture. And I deal with this distinctly, too, through the book of Benjamin Yehuda called Hebrew is Greek. You have this very powerful Hebrew scholar who published his 30-year research through Oxford University with the title Hebrew is Greek, and in it he lays out how the Jews took everything from the Greeks, and they don't talk about it, of course. He does it through this comparative analysis between Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic, and he distinctly proves how Arabic and Hebrew both come from Greek. And, you know, his research was just groundbreaking, astounding, but of course it's been shut up. His books have been pulled, and it's been 30 years since he's published his books, at least.
What was the name
again? He's been shut up by his fellow Jews.
What was the name? The name again of this?
Okay. Hebrew is Greek by Joseph Yehuda with a Y. And the moment you punch it in, you'll find free copies online, and et cetera, et cetera. So my book analyzes his book and deals with all that. So again, that book can be found on my website, johnkountouris.com, and then my second book can also be found on my website with the title Hellenic Crisis. You know, so that's just the easiest way to find these books. You just go on to johnkountouris.com. You see the 2 book images pop up. Boom, there they are. You click on them, and you'll see immediately where they're sold. You know, the second book really is too critical because it's going to wake up the masses in the Western English-speaking world, at least, about what's going on in Greece in order for people to understand Greece better and to support Greece and to petition their governments to stop this madness. We need to petition the U.S. government to stop this madness with Greece because the U.S. government plays a heavy role in this, because Greece takes lending from the IMF, and the IMF is controlled by the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve, through these organizations, gives major funding to Greece. In other words, through the IMF, American government, with the U.S. taxpayer dollars, is giving money to Greece to be bailed out. And this is the U.S. taxpayer dollars. This is, of course, going on in either directly or indirectly onto the national debt of the United States. We're printing money to fund the IMF, and the IMF is bailing out these nations. So this book is very critical that people understand what's going on. Greece didn't need a bailout. Greece is just fine. Greece has tons of natural resources. They're a very wealthy nation. What's being done on them is to destroy them as a people and to steal their natural resources.
Kind of a sore point with me that we are giving so much money out in foreign aid. We really don't, when we've got homeless veterans on the streets here.
Yeah, that to me is just the worst part of this country, how we exploited these poor vets to go fight these wars, and now, of course, we don't even take care of them. And, of course, the vets are waking up. I could tell you this, I hear a lot of stories from veterans, including my own brother, who's a veteran, basically how the veterans that are waking up to all these fraud wars and that are saying something about it, they're being persecuted by the government, if not silenced in that so many ways. And that really is something where, you know, that really makes me angry. That makes us all angry because, you know, the veterans who spilt their blood for this nation basically are now being persecuted by their own government because they're realizing the whole fraud behind all of this.
That's right. I realized, I woke up to the Gulf of Tonkin lie, and I volunteered for Vietnam. I didn't go over there, but a lot of my brothers did. And more of them have committed suicide when they got home because of lack of the support from our people. Then more of them have committed suicide than were killed by the Viet Cong. I find that really, really tragic and objectionable. And by the way, this show will go on Veterans Today, and I really appreciate your input. Now, one of the things that we lack here is any kind of organization that can actually do something that we can go to. You know, if you go to the Aryan Nation, if you're black and you go to the NAACP, and you're Jewish and you go to the ADL, that's okay. But if I'm white and go to the Aryan Nation, suddenly I'm a racist. What about Golden Dawn? Talk to me a little bit about Golden Dawn over in Greece, and tell me what they're doing. Maybe I need some advice. Maybe I need some input here.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm glad you bring it up. Like I said before, I'm involved with the party. So, yeah, I mean, I guess you could say I'm involved with Greek politics. Basically, you know, I help edit their English website. I help to translate all their articles from Greek into English. Sometimes they use me a lot heavily, sometimes occasionally, but I'm connected with the party. Now, if you go to their website, this is how it's spelled, and then you can click on the English icon because you're going to see a lot of the articles in English. It's spelled XRYS, as in Sam, HAYGH.com.
All right, let me check that. XPYSHAYCH.com.
No, let me do it one more time. I'm sorry. X, R as in Robert, Y as in yes, S as in Sam, H as in heaven, A as in apple, Y as in yes, G as in God, H as in Henry.
Okay.
.com.
Okay, got it.
When you log on, you're going to see it in Greek, but then in the top right-hand corner, click on the English icon. You're going to get the articles in English. You're going to learn a lot of stuff about the party. This is an astounding party that is composed of professionals. You have doctors, you have lawyers, you have journalists that are super smart. They know everything about the New World Order. They know everything about Jewish control of Greece and, of course, the whole world. They are just something else. I mean, they are just a godsend. They know, of course, everything, of course, the truth about Hitler and everything else. Now, Basically, what's happening to them is this. The very powerful Jewish circles in America and around the world are telling the Greek government to basically deal with Golden Dawn. In September of 2013, Golden Dawn, the then Greek Prime Minister Andonis Samaras, who's of Jewish extraction, unfortunately, and of course he doesn't tell it to anyone. He pretends like he's the pseudo-Greek patriot. He was told by Ronald Lauder and, of course, Mr. Davis, who heads the Jewish lobby here, to imprison Golden Dawn. Okay? Our Greek government was told by very powerful Jewish circles from America to carry out certain policies for them. And that in itself is astounding. Now, the then Minister of Justice, Mr. Rupakiotis, Mr. Rupakiotis, he came on to Greek TV while this was all going on. And he said unequivocally that the Jewish lobby in America basically is controlling our Prime Minister and telling him to handle Golden Dawn. That was all over the media. So this wasn't a quote-unquote conspiracy theory, of course. Now, we also have, and I write about this in my book, and you'll find it in my book, Hellenic Crisis, it's all there. We also have Ronald Lauder himself coming out and saying, basically, that we told the Greek government what to do with Golden Dawn, and he boasts about it. This is recorded in the website of the Central Lobby in Greece. It's this huge organization that has been in Greece for 100 years, and it literally constitutes a nation within a nation in Greece. It has full rights as a nation, and it parasitically sits within Greece. And the Jews in Greece who are registered with this organization do not have to pay taxes to the Greek government. The Jewish businesses in Greece don't pay taxes to the Greek government. They give contributions to this Jewish central lobby in Greece. And this is unbelievable, and this is something a lot of Greeks have been waking up to, because most people have not even known this. And I detail all this in my book with official Greek government documents. And it's all in English. Like I said, my book is all in English. All my books are in English, and I'm trying to publish them in Greek right now too. But you know, basically, Ronald Lauder, who is he? Ronald Lauder is, of course, the CEO of Estee Lauder, a billion-dollar makeup company. And unfortunately, you have women around the world that are paying loads of cash monthly to basically deal with their makeup habit. And this money, unfortunately, is going to basically crimes being perpetrated by these Jewish criminals. And Ronald Lauder, unfortunately, who's a billionaire out of all this, was also a major player in 9/11. And we all, of course, at this point know about this. Mr. Christopher Bolin, the journalist from the American Free Press, he's talked about this and detailed this. Of course, Ronald Lauder was part of the privatization committee of the World Trade Center that gave them over to the private owner, Mr. Larry Silverstein, months before 9/11. And of course, none of that was coincidental, as we know in retrospect. But Ronald Lauder, though, is a major player in Greece, and he's told our Greek government how to handle Golden Dawn. So our top leaders in Golden Dawn went to prison for about 18 months. 18 months they sat in prison because of this crime. And of course, they're the only party that has spoken out against Jewish control of Greece, and of course against this fraud that has been going on with the Greek crisis the past 5 years, and how the Greek government, in cooperation with the Troika, has basically made up this whole Greek crisis thing as a means to enslave the Greek people. So, therefore, it's no surprise that the Golden Dawn members have been persecuted. But they're very alert, very awake. The leader, Nicholas Michaloliakos, is a very powerful individual, a very smart guy. My aunt knows his family very well. She's even baptized in the Orthodox faith, many of his relatives. You know, so it's a party that's waking up Greece, but it's also waking up Europe, and it's getting a lot of attention from worldwide media. Of course, they've been demonized a lot by worldwide media, but it's getting a lot of attention from patriot groups, too, around America and around the world, and that's a good sign.
Do you see any hope for any organizations in America. I mean, now I think, and I've done stories on this, there is a sort of an organization, a loose organization that has just come under attack here in America that I've been a part of for over 45 years, and that's the bikers. What they did in Waco with the police opening up and arresting 172 motorcyclists has kind of awoken America up, and they just made a run last weekend. I don't know how many showed up, but well over 100 bikers showed up in Waco that weren't shot last weekend. But
wow.
You know, my first club went to the Banditos, my second club went to the Hells Angels, and it was a club that wasn't a gang at all.
Right.
You know,
you know, what really angers me is how this type of biker groups, like the Hells Angels, they're very much demonized by, of course, the government, the federal government. I mean, there's rules on the books, basically, in respective states, like here in California, and I know because my sister was a sheriff, that basically if you wear one of these jackets, you're considered a gang, and you can't wear it in public and all this garbage. You know, so that's just another attempt by the federal government to curb basically patriot groups that want to make a difference in this country and they want to stand up to tyranny.
They're afraid of us because A, we're not afraid, B, we do carry weapons, we are armed, and they're afraid of any type of organization. And so they try to demonize the leader. I actually did time with Mother Dawn Chambers here in Texas.
Wow.
So, and again, he was a great guy. He was a great guy. Sonny Barger and I had a little bit of difference of opinion. I think I asked his ex-wife out, and he got pissed off at me about that. Hadn't talked to me since, but but if it had been maybe 30 days earlier, I would have been one of the ones they arrested or one of the ones they shot, because I've been to 100 of those type of gatherings, those type of meetings, from toy runs to just concerts, you know, Sturgis, Daytona, Laconia. I've been to them all. I published 3 biker magazines, and
nice.
When they came after me in Phoenix there, I was publishing not only the Free American, but I was publishing Thunder Riders too. And it was the guys in blue pinstripe suits that came in and didn't like me. We don't like you publishing that biker magazine. What the hell are you talking about? It's just a biker magazine.
Right.
Well, you paint a rosy picture riding motorcycle and you got a big audience. We don't like that. I see. Does the term tough shit mean anything to you? Get out of my hospital.
Yeah. Right.
But they did the same thing with the militias. I mean, when we started the militia wasn't no gang. We did it in the governor's office. Here, Governor, here's my card. This got my phone number. You ever need any help? You need you know, we're here for you.
Yeah. Do you have any type of rapport with Mr. Bruce Campbell?
Absolutely.
I know he was
Bruce has been on my show many times, and he stopped coming on for a while because he couldn't get a job. He
Oh.
could, you know, that's what they do. They go after you so you can't get, Bruce couldn't get a job for a long time, but he's been on my show many times. I list him under J.B. Campbell.
Yeah, he's just an astounding guy, and I've read a lot of his articles too. So, yeah, he played a major role with the militias too, right?
Yes, yeah, before me.
He still does, I guess.
Before me.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Right. Wow.
And you know,
Yeah.
even the militia, ADL gives me credit for doing the militia in New Mexico because I put it in my magazine, and that consisted of a few people, a few ex-soldiers, a few ex-policemen, and my teenage sons going to NRA range and being trained by a professional. That was the New Mexico militia.
Right. Well, militias really are the salvation of this country because, our founding fathers straight out said, I think it was, it was our founding fathers who basically said that, we need to have militias here in this country in case, of course, the federal government decides to basically tyrannize us one day. Our own founding fathers. And, it's just astounding how so many people out there don't know about that. And when they see militias or then they see these groups, particularly, let's take, for example, the white pride groups, they freak out. They're demonized in the media, and, these type of groups, all they do is receive flack. But I think more and more people are waking up. They're waking up to all this racial garbage that's being spoon-fed people in the media and all these fake shootings that are taking place where white officers are shooting black, teens and this and that and all this type of stuff. And they're starting to realize, hey, black people, I believe, are starting to realize, hey, you know what? The white people really are not behind this. It's the propaganda of the media. It's, the Jewish elite. And they're starting to realize, hey, you know what? The whole slave trade had to do with Jewish merchants from Venice, which I mentioned earlier. And there's been powerful books written about this, detailing all this, how the Jews were in control of the slave trade for the most part. And of course, I mentioned earlier too that it all started with the black nobility from Venice in the 1300s with the Greeks, and it carried on from them. And this is a practice that carried on since then. And there's been very powerful books that Jewish scholars, a couple, I can't remember names right now, but I know there's one African Muslim scholar who wrote a book called The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, where he details all of this and, telling the black people, hey, the white people aren't your enemy here. And of course there was Myron Fagan, who years ago, who was a friend of Eustace Mullins. Myron, of course, was a Jew that espoused Christianity and did numerous broadcasts on the New World Order and on the Jewish takeover of America through the Rothschilds. It was him who said, you're going to see in the future all these racial riots take place because basically the Jews are prodding on the blacks to fight against the whites. And it all started, of course, with this infamous play on Broadway called The Melting Pot in 1911, which basically depicted whites as evil, angry people who wanted to basically destroy and kill all the blacks and all the Jews. So this whole thing too with the Confederate flag is just unbelievably insane. I believe most people out there are realizing the truth behind this and not, paying any mind to it. But, people need to stand up and put their foot down and say no.
Well, I've got a Confederate flag with the 13 stars in the back. Well, it's right beside the American flag and the Texas flag. So, and if you don't like my rebel flag, you can kiss my rebel ass.
Right, along with the "Don't Tread on Me" flag, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And we also down here in Texas, we got the one with the cannon on it that says "Come and take it."
That's right, and of course, we all know where that phrase comes from, right, Clay?
Yeah, and we still remember the Alamo, and I'll see to it that we all remember Waco.
Yeah, but the actual phrase "come and take it" was said by, of course, the leader of the 300 Spartans, Leonidas, when the Persians invaded the pass at Thermopylae, when they had the great Battle of Thermopylae back in 480. It was 380 BC. That's when the Persians were invading, of course, Greece to take it over. And Leonidas, the leader of the 300 Spartans, tells, of course, the Persians at the pass, basically, try to invade Greece, try to come and take it. So he told them in Greek, come and take it, basically, if you dare. That's literally how the exact translation comes out. That phrase has gone throughout all of history. It's used, of course, by patriot groups today. It's used by Navy SEALs. They actually tattoo that phrase on their body, in Greek, actually. And I remember real quick, back in 2012, when one of the fathers of the 16 slain special ops guys who went out to this stupid mission 3 years ago to find, quote-unquote, bin Laden, right?
Yeah.
And how we remember how these guys found out it was all a fraud, and then about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months later, Obama sent them on another mission, right? Somewhere, I think it was in Pakistan, and lo and behold, the Black Hawk helicopter has a major accident, and all 16 of these guys die. They perish. And of course, this, of course, was talked about extensively on the media, and of course, more extensively and more in depth by the blogs and by social media, and of course, by Patriot 9/11 groups. Now, we all know what took place there. These guys found out the fraud about bin Laden, being, of course, understanding, of course, the guy has been dead since 2001, from what all accounts show, after 9/11. After he gave an interview with this Pakistani news source saying he had nothing to do with 9/11. And of course, Mr. Carl Bernstein referred to this on CSNBC 2 years ago, saying Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with 9/11. Well, anyway, one of the fathers of these 16 slain special ops guys was on Fox News back in 2012. And he gave an interview with his wife. And the guy was, of course, still upset, obviously, and I'm sure he still is, angry, and as he was speaking, he kept putting his forearm up to the camera, pretending like he was scratching his nose or his head or something like that. And you can clearly see on his forearm the tattoo, okay? The phrase tattooed in Greek, in ancient Greek, molon lave, come and take it. And he kept repeatedly doing this on camera, showing his forearm with this phrase in ancient Greek. Now, most people out there wouldn't understand, unless, of course, you're Greek, that this guy has on his arm tattooed this phrase. But the guy kept doing it repeatedly, and I believe he kept doing it as a message to basically these dark forces controlling our government. Hey, you bastards, come and take it, and I'm pissed at you because you killed my son. That's what this guy was sending a signal. And when I saw that, I just was like, man, that was just powerful. This guy, he's not afraid. One of the fathers, he understood what took place. He understood his son died, in this terrible Black Hawk helicopter crash because he dared to find out the truth about the Osama bin Laden mission back in, 2001. And it was just kind of tear-jerking, but it was like, wow, this guy's doing this live on Fox. He's sending a message. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I appreciate that. We need more people like that. It's as far as I can tell, the biggest problem we got is simply funding. They closed down. I had one magazine sold for $500,000, and I still retained 50% of it. We signed the papers on Thursday. Put a press release out on Friday, and Monday I walked into the office. The CEO's white and shaking. I can't go through with the deal, Clay. I can't go through with the deal. They've threatened to impeach me from my own company. They've contacted every stockholder in my corporation. who has the power to do that, John?
Right, yeah. Well, yep.
And again, this organization, I mean, I had William Pierce on my show before, years ago, a few years ago. And, but if you joined the Aryan Nation, suddenly you were a racist.
Right. Right.
And the same thing happened. I have a book out called Mystery Babylon that I documented all these attacks on me. But I started that when they started attacking Christian identity the same way they attacked the militia. So my friend Eli James, who's a Christian identity pastor, wrote that segment of the book, and that's available on shop.freeamerican.com. But they immediately started a rumor. I was taking it into biker bars because I was still writing for my biker magazine or my biker website. Oh, he's selling that book to raise money for a snitch named Huevos. Sorry, don't know any snitch named Huevos. Don't raise money for nobody but me. But this is the way the Jews operate. They whisper, they lie, and they do anything they can to destroy legitimate business and businessmen out there.
Right. Yeah. They do, but I just think that people, when they get bold and stand up to them, they back down. And when people do this in mass, major things that they have planned for us are quelled. The tide is turned, and people don't understand the power that they have, and that these people cannot exert power over our destinies if we believe it. If we basically assert ourselves, unite, and basically go out there and take the destiny back of our lives, of our families, of our communities, and of our nation, and of our nations. And I'm talking about the good citizens of the world who understand the New World Order and understand this whole ploy to create, one world government and one world religion through, globalization and all this stuff. The fact that the United States even has the United Nations base there in New York in itself is the ultimate act of treason and a betrayal of our country. There's a lot of positive signs, and I think if we remain positive, that the tide will turn and people will start to wake up. But people in Europe, though, Clay, for years, for decades, from the 4th century AD up until the turn of the century, they did not tolerate Jewish crimes. The Jews were kicked out 109 times on record from European nations all over Europe because of their crimes. And this is a historical fact. And this is something that people don't want to talk about. This is something that no one, of course, can ignore because there's so much heavy historical records that prove all this and indicate all this. Everyone knows that the Jews suffered, and of course the Jews like to talk about how they suffered and were persecuted, quote unquote, for so many years, but they never tell you the reason why. They never explain to you why. No one ever explains. All we do is just cry to them and say, oh, they suffered as a people, this and that. But no one ever explains why. Well, we all know why. We know. We have Eustace Mullen's books. We have so many other authors out there now who talk about it. Because of their financial crimes, because of their intrigue, because of human sacrifice, because of a whole slew of issues. And this is all on record, and this cannot be done. I mean, even Shakespeare wrote the book The Merchant of Venice talking about this, So, we have authors all over the place. I mean, Ezra Pound, who I believe himself was Jewish, of course, his other guys, T.S. Eliot, Hemingway, these guys didn't like the Jews either. And the Jews, of course, in the literary field, they talk about how, oh my God, all these guys were anti-Semites and this and that. Ezra Pound, a self-hating Jew, blah, blah, blah. So, there's a lot of, historical record about all this. But the good news about it is that people are waking up, including, of course, Jewish people And you can indicate it by, the way you can indicate that is by the fact that they take a clear stand against their own communities, against not only Zionism, but against Judaism, because a lot of people like to say, oh, the problem is Zionism. No, the problem is also Judaism, because this is entrenched in the Jewish mindset. There's very few Jews out there, of course, like I said, who have really decided to take all this on, and they've paid for it. You know, so hopefully more of those guys come out, because, you know, what are we going to do here? I mean, we need as much help dealing with this as possible. I mean, I mentioned Myron Fagan earlier.
I have a whole clip of Myron's up on my website and others. We're out of time, John. I'll have you back on soon. Thank you very much. God bless you. Keep up the good work.
God bless you too, Clay. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Hey, send a donation. Help me keep this fight up. God bless you. I am Clay Douglas, freeamerican.com.